if someone asked me, is 200 of Polkadot's native token called DOT considered good enough, even though I can't speak on anyone's behalf, if someone were to ask me that, personally, I wouldn't find that disappointing, even though nothing I say is financial advice, because if let's say DOT in a make-believe scenario went to the price of $50, now at that point, 200 DOT would be worth 10 grand because 50 times 200, 10 grand. However, when people like to say, okay, who cares about 10 grand? Well, the way I view it is this. If let's say I saved 50% of that and I use it for the next cycle in a make-believe scenario, and for whatever reason, let's say during the next cycle, that 5 grand that was saved does a 10x. Now, arguably at that point in that make-believe scenario, that's 50 grand. Now, again, some people may be thinking, who cares about that? Well, a lot of my friends that I know out there, they're constantly traveling, eating out, having these expensive car payments. They don't have that much in their savings account, let alone in, their portfolio or something like that. So in the grand scheme of things, considering kind of like the expenses that a lot of my friends have, I would arguably say, that's not such an easily achievable amount in the grand scheme of things. Like in terms of not the income, but then in terms of actually being able to have that saved in a sense. So when people like to say, oh, it's not that good and all this, well, again, it's going to depend on a case by case basis. But personally, for me, I wouldn't find that too disappointing. Not to mention, $50 is actually around an 11x from here. So when people like to say, oh, yeah, who cares about 11x and all this? Well, what is Bitcoin going to do in the next 6 to 10 months? Right? Some people are saying, oh, maybe Ethereum grand. That's less than a 3x from here. Ethereum at 10 grand, that's also less than a 3x from here. So when people like to say, oh, 11x is not that good and all this, again, it's going to be different on a case by case basis, but I don't find that too bad. Even if, let's say, DOT just maybe went to the price of $25, so give or take around a 5x, right? Even at that point, I wouldn't choose Bitcoin or Ethereum over this. It just makes no sense to me because, of course, DOT is an altcoin, and also, something like Bitcoin and Ethereum for this cycle, I feel like it already has kind of done its thing a little bit. Now, there still may be some ways to go, but then in the grand scheme of things, in terms of hypothetical percentage price increase, I don't know how I feel about that. So this is why I would rather prefer DOT. If I was given the option, either Bitcoin or Ethereum or this is going to have to be the winner for me. Even though I don't only hold DOT, if I was only given those 3 options, this is the one that I would choose. Even though I can't speak on anyone's behalf, I'm not telling anyone to do anything when it comes to DOT. However, at the price of $50, considering current circulating supply, market cap at that point would be around 80 billion. So, for instance, we've seen like Dogecoin reach over $80 billion in market cap back in 2021, and that was years ago. In the peak of the 2021 bull run, around 300 million crypto owners. Now we have over 600 million. So that's a big difference right there. That's pretty much double the amount of crypto owners currently, and I don't think we're even in a fully fledged type of altcoin season. And again, Bitcoin has never reached 150 grand, let alone 200 or 250. And we already have this many crypto owners right now, which I think is kind of crazy to think about. However, even besides that point, why wouldn't $50 surprise me? It's because I am a big fan of the fundamentals of Polkadot. Let me explain what Polkadot is all about in a very brief way. Polkadot is focused on something called interoperability. Now, if we take a look at why this even matters, it's because if we view many blockchains out there, many networks out there, because a lot of them that I do see are independent of one another, they cannot freely send data and value to each other, and as a result, they lack something called interoperability if that is the case. So if we take a look at Polkadot, it's actually trying to achieve something amazing again, right? Being focused on interoperability, it's focused on connecting blockchains together, and for instance, we take a look at a very famous example of what I mean, of what I just described before. Bitcoin and Ethereum, very massive. However, because they're independent of one another, they cannot freely send data and value to each other. Again, arguably they lack interoperability, and that is where something like Polkadot steps in and quite essentially kind of saves the day a little bit. That's my analogy. And when it comes to Polkadot, people like to say, oh, it's kind of useless. Sure, it may not have a cool factor that, let's say some blockchain gaming project or a project that's heavily focused on AI may have in terms of the, again, hype and cool factor, may not necessarily have that. But Polkadot, I think, has actual utility. It doesn't seem like a project that's going to disappear once the fans or hype is gone because it actually has a use case. And just think about if, let's say, there's going to be more blockchains that are going to pop up, if, let's say, there's going to be more networks that are going to pop up moving forward, I think it's only logical to assume that as that does happen, Polkadot may also still be around because, of course, again, some projects out there, they may want interoperability. Who knows? So when people like to say, oh, again, Polkadot is kind of useless, sure, maybe a little bit boring in a sense where it's not that cool or interesting compared to some of the more hyped projects out there, but I don't think it's useless and I don't think it's a bad project by any means. However, let's also take a look at, for instance, Polkadot. It has something called Kusama. Kusama is basically a canary network to Polkadot. And what this basically means is that, quite essentially, the way I take a look at it is that Kusama is sort of this testing ground a little bit. It's kind of like a funneling system for Polkadot. Let me explain what I mean by that. Usually, when projects want to, let's say, launch on Polkadot or build or whatever, typically they're going to start off with Kusama first. Now, why is that in some cases? It's because, for instance, on Kusama, it's typically easier to make changes on when compared to Polkadot, so that's a big bonus. Not to mention, it's allegedly far cheaper to rent building space. So then, again, that's why a lot of projects typically start off with Kusama to kind of test out the waters. And then eventually, if, they test out the project under real economic conditions and it's all good, eventually some of them do move on later to Polkadot. However, they don't necessarily have to do this because we take a look at Moon River, which is on Kusama. Again, that's pretty awesome as well. It's not like there's this requirement that they're kind of forced, in my perspective, to move on later to Polkadot. But then at the same time, I think it's pretty good nonetheless because it's kind of like, let's say I want to test drive a car or something like that, right? It's the way I take a look at something like Kusama, just kind of a testing ground before the real thing, if that makes sense. Now, of course, Kusama is also real, but I'm just saying, just kind of people usually view Polkadot, but then Kusama is kind of there. So I think something like Kusama is really going to depend, of course, on Polkadot. But then again, it's a good addition, I think, to the whole vibe when it comes to this project. So any way I view it, I don't think it's such a bad project to me. I think it's very interesting. I like the use case. And all I have to do right now, in my opinion, arguably, is just stay patient because I will not know the exact moment in time Dot is going to do this or do that. I do not know the future. I don't have a magic crystal ball where I can see, oh, it's going to happen at this time, at this time. I have no idea what's going to happen next Monday or next Tuesday. I mean, who knows? Even if I pulled up a price chart, that's not going to change the way I take a look at things moving forward. Like, what is that going to do? If I pulled up a price chart and drew a random triangle, I still do not know the future. So why would I do that? Now, some people like to say, oh, because technical analysis is this or that. Well, I see some people out there, they pull up a price chart, draw some random triangle. They say it's going to happen at this time because this technical analysis thing said so and whatever. And then what happens? It doesn't happen. And then they just like, oh, yeah, let's adjust the triangle. What is that about? So then at that point, I'm just drawing. I'm not into doing that. I'd rather focus on the fundamentals. I'd rather just focus on staying patient and just holding and just waiting, and that's about it. To me, it's not about knowing the exact moment in time. It's more so preparing for a moment in time in a case where, let's say, something good does happen. That is what I'm doing. It's kind of like for me, let's say, even though I've never ran a marathon, I'm just saying, let's say I'm practicing to run a marathon. I'd rather be doing that just kind of consistently if I'm into that. So then if there's an opportunity to go to a race or something, then of course I'll be more prepared, as opposed to if I'm just trying to figure out the exact moment in time and then I'm just preparing so close to it or whatever. Again, that's just the concept that I have. I'd rather be preparing as opposed to finding the exact moment in time. So all I'm doing is just dollar cost averaging, holding, and just waiting. And with the way altcoins are heading as of right now, if let's say it kind of continues near the end of this year to maybe Q1 of next year, again, I'm going to be hypothetically very excited and I'm just staying patient and that's about it. But again, when someone asked, hey, is 200 dot considered good? I can't speak on anyone's behalf, but I don't find that disappointing personally if let's say that was the case. And feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I greatly appreciate it. It's Willie the Captain, and I'll catch you all in the next one. I'm out. Peace. Bye.